Hello and welcome to the latest Levelling Up Goals seminar. Today we're going to talk about flexible working and how the work environment can be changed to adapt things to make sure that levelling up can happen at a faster rate. Now, this is in association with Virgin Money. And Virgin Money is a full-service digital bank serving 6.5 million customers across the UK. It offers market-leading products and services to meet the full range of customers' retail and banking needs. Virgin Money aims to provide a consistently world-class experience for customers through its leading technology platform, telephone banking, and a national network of innovating stores and business banking centres. By making banking better, Virgin Money seeks to deliver on its purpose of making you happier about money. Now, Virgin Money and the Purpose Coalition recently launched a report assessing its current impact on levelling up across the country. And we'll be talking about that in a few minutes' time. The Levelling Up Impact Report, developed in partnership with the Purpose Coalition, benchmarks Virgin Money's work against an innovative set of 14 levelling up goals, many of which we've been discussing on these webinars over the last year. It identifies the areas where Virgin Money is already making a positive impact and makes recommendations on the areas in which it can do even more. Well, as usual, we have a stellar panel to take us through this subject, starting off, of course, with Justine Greening, founder and chair of the Purpose Coalition and Levelling Up Goals, of course, former Education, Transport and International Development Secretary. Tulip Sadiq MP joins us as well. She's Labour Member of Parliament for Hampstead and Kilburn and Shadow Economic Secretary to the Treasury. She's a governor at Emmanuel Primary School, a trustee of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, and a patron of the charity Leaders Plus. Sarita Brown is Group Chief People and Communications Officer at Virgin Money UK plc and is a member of the executive leadership team. She was appointed to the role in November 2021. And prior to joining Virgin Money, Sarita was a managing director at the US global bank Citi and led the HR function for the global functions and operations and technology business in Europe, the Middle East and Africa region. Lovely long job title there, Sarita. Right, let's introduce the subject with Justine. And Justine, just explain the whole concept of flexible working and why you think this is such an important factor for us to be discussing in this webinar.
I think it really matters because, as everyone knows, in the grand scheme of employment law, we haven't had flexible working for that long. Actually, the original laws around flexible working were passed back in 2014. But as Tulip can come on to talk a little bit about, there's a real debate about whether they are still fit for purpose, how they need to change. And of course, what we suddenly found during COVID is that a lot of employers had to move online. And so this issue of flexible working suddenly rose right up the agenda. I think where we started with it back in 2014 was that the laws were changed to give people rights after 26 weeks, I think it is, for flexible working with their employers. But what was really interesting was after those laws came in, actually, we didn't really see as much take up of that right of flexible working as perhaps we might have expected. And so over time, you started to dig into what's going on with that. And a lot of the time, sometimes people were making requests they were turned down, but sometimes it's just the culture in the business. And what COVID has done is challenge that culture for the first time, utterly significantly. And when we were doing the work with Virgin Money on their levelling up plan, and they were looking at products and how their products can really be accessible to people who perhaps really need a chance to access savings and credit. That's goal 7 of the Levelling Up Goals, when they were looking at all of the work that they're doing internally within the business around health and well-being. One of the things that really came out of that work was a growing focus on flexible working, but not just from almost a defensive perspective, which is, oh, employees really wanted it, so we thought we ought to do it, but much more from a perspective of, this is a brilliant thing for us to do. And not only can it potentially allow us to have far wider groups of people able to work at Virgin Money, so in other words, opening up careers to more people, actually for people already at the company, you know, you said, as you pointed out, Ian, that the purpose was making you happier about money. Part of that was also about people who worked at Virgin Money. And so Rita can talk a lot more about this, but this is a really interesting example of an employer that's genuinely said, right, how does this fit into what we're doing? But how can we run towards this and make it a core part of how we can be successful as a company? There's pros and cons to doing flexible working, as we'll no doubt come on to talk about. But I think it's going to be probably businesses like Virgin Money that show us, if you like, where the pros are above all. So an interesting discussion ahead, and a really, really important one for a lot of people.
So Rita, let's come to you next. Just explain why you wanted to get involved in this initiative and what it means for Virgin Money.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Justine said it really well about COVID challenging the culture for the first time. And I think that was across the world. But for Virgin Money, it was in a way timing that lined up with a philosophy that we were already working on. And it was prior to my arrival. Wish I could take credit, Ian, but it was a piece of work that was really born out of wanting to rethink not only how did we operate as a bank and how did we service our customers, but why are we doing what we're doing? And the word purpose, I think, up until a couple of years ago, probably felt a little bit vague and opaque. But for Virgin Money, and especially aligned up with the Virgin Group brand, it really meant something. It was, we don't just do things for the sake of doing it. We're here for a purpose, and we need our colleagues to understand that. We need our customer to feel the benefit of that. And also we need to make sure that we can continue to generate money because we're a business. So it really was trying to pull a few things together and make it make sense in one overarching goal. What grounded it quite firmly over the last 2 years, given the COVID pandemic, was a need to respond to what people from the ground up were asking for, which was, how can you help me navigate this new world that we found ourselves in?
Julie, let's come on to you as the current politician on the panel. When you hear that term, flexible working, what do you immediately think of?
Thanks, Ian, and thanks very much. I think before I get on to that, Ian, I just wanted to say I'm really grateful to the Purpose Coalition for organising the seminar, because I don't feel people are really asked to make the case for the improvements in productivity and the workforce participation that flexibility can bring. And that's really what I think of when I think of flexible working. Ian, I think about, because I passionately believe in it, I believe that if flexible working is done right, it can actually improve workers' well-being, but it also does bring significant benefits to our economy. That's, for me, flexible working done right. Those are the two things that happens. And as you said, I'm the current politician on the panel, although Justine had many years of experience before me. I introduced the flexible working bill.
She's got it out of her system now.
She did, very lucky her. But I introduced a flexible working bill in the House of Commons. And what I wanted to do with that bill was I wanted to give workers the right to flexible working from the first day of employment, except in exceptional circumstances. And I did include that because there's some situations where you can't have it, and that's fine. But what I wanted to call on is for all employers to offer flexible arrangements in employment contracts and specify them in job adverts, because it shows that many more people will apply for a job if it's actually specified in job adverts, and it isn't really done at the moment. And, you know, Justine was obviously a member of a different party than me when she was in Parliament, and actually my bill was endorsed by several people from the Conservative Party, such as Laura Farris and a few others, because they recognise that some of the innovative and forward-looking companies are already reaping the rewards of flexible working, but we just don't have enough people doing it. We don't have enough organisations doing it. I'm sure the statistic will be branded around a bit later, but Ernst & Young quantified that the introduction of greater flexibility in its working arrangements was worth £15 million to the company per year as a result of gains in productivity. I mean, I just think we're being silly by not introducing flexible working if we can have such increases in productivity.
How do they measure that?
So what they looked at was things like well-being, the number of days that were taken off because people felt like they didn't have to because they had flexible working, the goals that were met or the targets that were met because people felt like they had enough time, I don't know, to do their own things, spend time with their families, take time off when they needed for necessary arrangements. And then in the end, the amount of product that they managed to secure, although that's probably not the term that they would use. And that's how they measured it. And that's how they wrote about it in their reports. But sadly, Ian, what I found is too many companies are continuing to cling to this false security of 20th century models of working. And both Sarita and Justine both picked on the pandemic. And I think the pandemic was a real opportunity to grasp flexible working and make it the norm. But I don't feel like we've done that. I don't know if the other panelists agrees, but I don't. I think for a brief period, we really indulged everyone, but not anymore.
I mean, essentially, going back to the Ernst & Young point, what they're saying is that a happy workforce means a more productive workforce.
Exactly.
And that actually is a statement of the bleeding obvious, if you think about it, isn't it? And I've never understood why some employers don't really concentrate on that part of their HR and think, well, how can we make our employees happier? Because they will be more loyal, they will be more productive, and they will be happier in the workplace. It is just common sense, in a sense, isn't it, Tulip?
It's common sense to me and it's common sense to you, Ian, but not to everyone. And despite much excitement in parts of politics and the media that flexible working really flourished during the lockdown, I actually looked at some research that TUC have done, and they pointed out that apart from home working, all the other forms of flexible working actually decreased since early 2020. So when you ask me, what do I think when I think of flexible working? I don't actually just think about working from home. There's lots of different types of flexible working, whether it's compressed hours, whether it's a 4-day week. There's lots of different things you could be doing. It doesn't have to be just working from home. And that's, I think, the problem that a lot of companies have. They're fixated on the fact that if you offer flexible working, everyone will be working from home and no one's coming to the office. And that's just not how it is.
But Justine, the pandemic did teach us that it is possible to work from home for a lot of people. I mean, I'll come on to the exemptions a little bit later on, because I think that was interesting that Tulip said, well, there would have to be some exemptions here. But the pandemic did teach a lot of people that home working was possible and in many cases desirable. How important is home working as part of this whole equation of flexible working? You're muted. You're out of practice, Justine.
I am. How's that happen? I think in many respects, it's almost the first time we had a national discussion about flexible working of any real substance. I think before, and I hesitate to use this word because women, we are part 50% of the population, but I think before it had been seen as a gender discussion, almost purely, and therefore not one that relevant to a wider population. I think what COVID did was just totally transform it and put it in a different space. And of course, Tulip's right. I mean, people applying for jobs now want to know whether or not this is hybrid, flexible working, whatever you want to call it. And it's right to say it's not just about home working. It's much, much more than that. And what you're seeing are a lot of smart employers really innovating and thinking very differently about trying new stuff and giving different approaches a go. But I think the other point to make is for a new generation of people coming through the system. So, we did an event up with Liverpool John Moores University a couple of months ago. When you hear them talking about what they want out of their careers, they do want much more flexibility. They're not necessarily expecting just to work at one place at a time. These are people who may want to do a bit of their own thing in terms of their own business, alongside having maybe what we might have seen as a more conventional career. So people just want flexibility on every single level, and employers that aren't offering that will simply miss out on a bigger and bigger part of the talent pool. And then inside, happy people equals happy numbers. I'm a finance person by training. So I just think you are seeing a big change. But I guess as Sarita will know from a Virgin Money perspective, actually, the case is just so compelling. When you look at, in the Virgin Money report, we set out how when people with learning disabilities were asked about flexible working, a significant percentage said they'd be more likely to stay and go and work at companies who had that in place. Same for people with physical disabilities. We know the challenges for people with caring responsibilities. So this is really about how you can open up careers to a whole brand new group of people for whom it's been a lot harder doing roles where you have to be in a particular place at a particular time. So I think it's really important. There's issues around staff development and training and how you make sure you do all of that. But I think you can work, I think you can do that. I think that's a challenge that we can easily meet. I think the prize of opening up careers to more people, though, is so important. We can't afford to miss it.
Sorry, let's come on to you on this, because look at it from the point of view of Just Virgin Money for a moment. What did the pandemic teach you about flexible working?
So firstly, Ian, I would say to echo points just made, flexible working isn't about home working. And I think it was home working because of COVID restrictions in the first phase, but we've been very clear this is about flexibility and options and equipping the workforce to be able to be productive, to be able to do their job, and to be able to feel like they can apply for roles regardless of where they may sit in the UK. The locationless piece was really important for us, and I think that was the key point, was flexibility doesn't mean one thing or the other, it's a hybrid approach. I think the second thing was to, and I've used this word with Justine in other conversations, we really democratizing access to opportunities. This is a really key point, and it's a socioeconomic point as well, because we've seen since November of launching this that the profile of people applying for roles at Virgin Money has drastically changed. We are seeing a more diverse pipeline. We are seeing applications double over the period year on year, and candidates are saying this is a big part of the reason why they have thought about Virgin Money as an employer. So it's not that they didn't think they couldn't work at Virgin Money, but candidates are selecting and are voting with their feet. How can I continue to work in the way I want to work and be productive? So this is a differentiator in attracting talent, but it's also shown us how we can mobilise internal talent as well as external candidates into opportunities across the country, and just get a much more diverse mix of skills, profiles of people, and the business, the managers and people leaders in the organisation are also saying that they have seen that difference, that they weren't able to access that opportunity before. So there are a number of things there, and also from a productivity perspective from a company, you know, the fact that people are attracted to us and we're not having to go out and source them means that there's a benefit to us as an organisation as well. So I think it's a win-win, and I think organisations resisting this are delaying the inevitable.
Let's go back to the point that Tulip made a moment ago about exemptions here, because some people will look at flexible working and think, well, this is just a middle class thing. This cannot apply to many jobs throughout the economy. It's fine for people in professional jobs, white collar jobs, but it won't work for traditional blue collar jobs. Tulip, what's your view on that?
I mean, yeah, I think we'd be unrealistic if we said that every single job could have flexible working. So if you have a deadline to build, I don't know, a factory at a certain time, and everyone's got to be on the ground in their hard hats, and there's got to be a time when you have to be building because the other times there's a noise restriction and you can't be building because there's sheltered housing next to you. I promise I'm not talking from personal experience, but you know, at that point you're not going to say to the workers, oh, actually you can do flexible working because there's a certain time, a certain task at hand, and it's got to be done. So I think we've got to be realistic, but I do also think it's whataboutery when you say, oh, actually, could we have flexible working? For example, parents will often ask flexible working. You're probably aware I have two very small children. So the drop-offs for me, one at school, one at nursery, the fact that I'm an MP and Parliament does tend to start at different times means that I can be flexible on there. And I think for parents, flexible working comes in so handy. I looked at the research from EHRC that 2 in 5 mothers don't request flexible working because they believe, often rightly, that it'll either be rejected or viewed negatively by the employer. And on that front, fathers are twice as likely as mothers to fear that asking for flexible working will damage their careers. Now, that's the kind of culture of fear I think that Justine sort of alluded to when she first spoke. There's not a culture of asking for it, but it would make the lives of parents so much easier if we didn't have an absolute meltdown every morning because we're thinking, how do we drop one child to nursery, one to school, and then get onto the tube to get into work on time. And like I said, I am one of the lucky ones. I'm not saying that, but I think the culture discourages you from asking for flexible working. What does it matter if in a job you start an hour later, if you're not dependent on the time frame for some reason? Like if you're a trader, for example, and you're relying on the timing in America, so you have to be at your desk at a certain time to match the time to work in America, that's a different story. But a lot of jobs are not like that. And I think they just don't have the culture. And there's this notion of if you're not at your desk at 8:30 or 8:45, looking smart, logged onto the computer, you're not doing your job well. And I just disagree with that.
Justine, do you see this as a sort of bit of a fear where the very people that you and everyone associated with the Purpose Coalition wants to help level up, they're going to be exactly the ones and say, well, this doesn't really apply to us?
Well, I agree 100% with what Tulip just said. And I think that there's been a big shift. I think there are some employers who, as Sarita was saying, literally behind the curve. But especially in the tight labour market that we've got now, you know, employers need to realise that there was a time when they got to pick, but not now. Now it's a buyer's market in a sense, or seller's market, whatever. The power is with people who are looking for roles, and finding that talent's never been more important. So employers being open to shift in the right direction on flexible working isn't just a nice thing to do. It's absolutely essential. And you can set your face against this, but I think what you'd probably be saying to people who might think about working for you is, if you can't even engage on flexible working, which I think is probably what people just assume should be happening now, then you're probably not going to be giving off a sense of you as a very good employer, full stop, because so many good employers are now engaging on a whole range of areas, including flexible working. So yeah, I see some employers out there, Ian, who just for whatever reason think that unless you're at your desk, you're not doing work. But it's not the kind of leadership that really attracts people to get involved with it these days, and it is changing quite rapidly.
Has there been any studies about the percentage of maybe reasonable sized employers that really have set their face against this? Because it is an attitudinal thing, isn't it? I suspect it's a generational thing as well, that you'll find that younger managers are far more open to flexibility than maybe people of my generation who've been around a long time and got used to doing it their way.
I think there's definitely something on that, and Tulip might have, you know, the stats, if you like, on levels of engagement. But in my experience, almost, you know, the younger the bosses, the more in tune they are with these sorts of issues. But I think whichever business we're talking to, there's a growing realization post-COVID that even if they weren't keen on it before, actually the world hasn't fallen apart. You know, they've worked out how to do it. So their employees, for the most part, like it. I think we need to be careful to remember, as has been said, that, you know, a lot of people can't necessarily do flexible working because of the roles that they're in, but actually there are way more roles that can be flexible working friendly than I think we've previously understood. And that's what we're all trying to push employers towards doing, the max rather than the min.
And sorry, how does technology help here? Because 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, I suspect that all four of us on this would have never heard of Zoom. And yet we're doing this on Zoom. We've got used to doing things on Zoom. And technology has helped us do this in a different way to how we might have done it before. How can it help the whole concept of flexible working?
It's critical, Ian, and you know, I always say to people when I've been talking about this, flexibility and this whole approach to managing your workforce is not for the faint-hearted. It requires a really big commitment from leadership all the way through to the organisation, but especially leadership, because you need to invest in people. The technology is core, because what it does is it allows the workplace to be transferable. And it goes back to the point I made about flexibility being an optionality play. So if you haven't got technology that can transcend these different places or environments that people will be working in, then you lose the efficiency, you lose the productivity angle and benefit of the business case of flexibility. So it's key, and it will continue to be key, and it will continue to be an investment because technology changes and it will need constant development. So this requires a significant commitment from business, and also on the other side of that, I would say development. So you need to be able to invest in your people, equip people with the people leadership skills of how do you manage not only with the technology, but how do you manage a workforce that's much more versatile, that's moving, that's agile. That requires you to invest in your people around development as well. And I just wanted to go back into the point around opportunities and different levels of working. In Virgin Money, we've had this challenge. So we've had people in stores, so the banks who are servicing customers, and we've kind of gone head on with them to say, well, what does flexibility mean for you when really you do need to be in the branch and you do need to be servicing customers? And we settled on a concept called team rhythms. So as long as a team can work with each other to understand what flexibility means for them, it could be that somebody in a store can actually work different hours or more flexible hours or go and do the school run without having to decrease their hours of working, because as a team you are covering the requirements of that particular store. So we've tried to empower people and give guidance and equip people so that you can kind of tailor that flexibility for yourself and also continue to meet customer requirements.
Tulip, how can you legislate in this area? Because you're never going to be able to cover every sector that needs an exemption. And do you look at, well, the size of a company, if it's got fewer than, I don't know, 20 employees or fewer than 5 employees, it would be incredibly difficult to draft, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this isn't straightforward. I think it's complex, but I think there's got to be a future where everyone does have a right to flexible working. But I mean, at the risk of sounding cheesy, this future isn't going to arrive on its own. I think there needs to be a fight to get there. And I'm just going to tell you very quickly about someone I spoke to before I did this panel. It's a woman called Claire, who had a young baby. She was looking to return to work on a more flexible working after her maternity leave. Claire's employer, bearing in mind she's been with them for 11 years, refused her request for working for fewer hours, but then they wouldn't even allow her to have a phased return to work to support her with childcare, which, by the way, Ian, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you, is extortionate in this country in terms of having to put your child in nursery.
So my listeners tell me.
Sorry?
So my listeners tell me.
Yes, it's absolutely extortionate, I tell you, and I'm on an MP salary. In the end, Claire had no choice. She left the company after 11 years of service, which I thought was completely unacceptable when I spoke to her. But the reason why she's essentially choosing between childcare and a career is because employers don't have to give you very good reasons about why they refuse your request for flexible working. That's one of the main problems in legislation. So the government promised in its 2019 manifesto and the 2021 that there'd be a consultation on flexibility and that they would look to make flexible working the default unless employers had good reasons not to. Now, this sounded good in theory. When I listened to it, I wasn't entirely convinced about the government's plans for getting there. And in their consultation, they proposed giving employees the right to request flexible working. But basically, these requests are simply rejected and there are no penalties. That's really the problem. You can have a very broad range of reasons why you reject someone's request for flexible working and you don't get penalized for it. So in my opinion, we've got to legislate where employers feel they have to give a proper reason if a request for flexible working is turned down. And I just think workers are constantly rejected for no good reason.
Also, just on that, let me push you on that, because what is a proper reason? Because an employer could literally say, well, it doesn't fit into our plans. How specific would they have to be?
I have to say, I don't think that's a good enough reason just to say it doesn't fit into our plans. If you can show we're not going to meet our company's target, for example, or your clients will suffer as a result, or we're losing more money because of your request to do compressed hours, or they could even say, like, okay, we're going to monitor this for 3 months to see if it works with you doing compressed hours or whatever they want to do in terms of flexible working. But by the end of it, if you haven't met your targets, if we're losing money, if we're making a loss, if our clients are unhappy, if the feedback is bad, okay, at that point you have to revert. But simply the answer in all the cases that I've looked at and have been rejected have literally been like, we've never done it before, or that's not company policy. It's just, they haven't even looked into it. So for me, it's a matter of, okay, you might have to change things initially, but even us now on Zoom at the moment, we had to change things initially. You saw in parliaments, like we went to virtual working and you saw how parliament was operating virtually. That was after years and years of lots of us saying we could be doing this virtually. But now a lot of the APPGs, a lot of the select committees meet on Zoom. But initially there were a few hiccups and we did iron those out. So for me, I just think it gives employers who are not happy to try something different a very good excuse, and there's no penalty for it.
So Rita, this report, which I've got, which isn't coming out on Zoom unless I put it a funny way, which I've got the black and white version because I was too mean to print out the colour one. It's called Levelling Up Impact Report by Virgin Money and Levelling Up Goals and the Purpose Coalition. And you've also got a programme, A Life More Virgin. Insert your own joke here, please. What motivated you to draw up this report? Because it's got some really interesting things in it. We could literally spend the whole hour talking about some of the conclusions. We'll just pick out what you thought were maybe the 2 or 3 most important conclusions. And do you think that many companies of a similar size as Virgin Money are actually doing the same thing? And if not, how would you encourage them to do so?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say that the purpose is really key to why that report kind of reads, I think, in as well as it does, in that there's a genuine intent to make sure that what we're doing for customers is really making banking and financial services and all these big words very accessible to everybody and a much more inclusive play. And I think having worked in financial services now for the last 12 years, it can feel like a bit of an exclusive domain, Ian, for certain people in society at certain levels. And I think what Virgin Money is trying to do is say, well, actually, with a bit of support, a bit of education, and just making some sensible choices about how we market and service products, we can open up financial prosperity for much more people than I think typically happens sometimes with banking above normal day-to-day transactions. Secondly, we have to have a workforce that understands that purpose and believes in it too, in order to deliver that purpose and that service provision. And so A Life More Virgin for us was saying, well, if you want to join us, and it goes to your point about what other companies need to do, you have to engage, you have to get the right type of workforce, and you have to engage that workforce in that philosophy. Otherwise, it's not going to be an authentically delivered agenda. It's going to be a gimmick. And I do think flexible working can sometimes fall into the gimmick label. I would not have joined Virgin Money if I felt that this was not an authentic, bottoms up, really well thought out proposition that's trying to link how we want to operate as a business, how we want to therefore deliver our purpose to different communities across the UK, and making that make sense, and also having some outcomes to actually say, and this is what we're going to deliver as a result, because accountability is often left to the wayside when these agendas are started. So I think we're holding ourselves accountable, and I think that comes up in the report in terms of some of the objectives we've set ourselves. It's not easy work, it's very tough, and I think the report is quite clear about that and realistic, and hopefully companies will see that it's the way to go. I think the advice I'd give other companies is have a genuine intent around this. It will not work if you don't. And if you just want to take bits of it, it won't work. You have to do everything. And that sometimes isn't a very, it's a hard task, especially when you know it's going to take commitment, investment, and accountability. But I don't think people have got a choice if they want to be a sustainable business moving forward.
I love the way you describe Virgin Money as a bottoms-up company. It's sort of what wine o'clock at 5 o'clock every day. Tina, going back to what the government can do, apart from legislation, I mean, government can lead by example. Government is the biggest employer in the country. If you take the NHS as part of government, government can actually play a big role here.
Yeah, but also government can stop saying stupid things like you get distracted by cheese at home or leaving nasty little notes on civil servants' desks. I don't think that's sending a very good message, as you say, leading by example. I'm not sure that's really helping. I was looking for the statistic, Ian, when I was talking to you, is that the fact that employers have an ill-defined ability to turn down flexible working requests, 4 in 5 workers want to work more flexibly, yet 1/3 of flexible working requests are rejected. And that's one of the things that I find quite astonishing. The other thing I wanted to pick up on is the government could start talking a bit more, other than just legislating, talk a bit more about the mental health impacts of flexible working, because that can be transformational. There's one study that suggested that 96% of staff in a company reported higher levels of happiness after agile working was introduced. We have a huge problem with mental health problems in this country and across the world, but especially in the UK, especially amongst men of a certain age. I mean, this is one of the things we could look at. Does agile working address this? And it's also, when you have better mental health among staff, it leads to higher levels of retention and a boost to talent recruitment. So I think it's not just legislation, and then you've picked up on this, it's also the rhetoric coming from the top, from government, and the culture change that comes to it. And Morgan Sindall Construction Infrastructure, I do quite a lot of work with them, and I did quite a lot of work with them in the flexible working bill. They said to me they had a 38% increase in job applications after they started introducing and promoting flexible working, and that it also helped to improve the gender diversity, ethnic diversity in their workforce as well. So I think not all businesses are as forward-looking as Virgin Money, Sarita, I have to say, but there's a lot to learn from it. And the impact of women who stop working, it's obviously a lot to do with the overall cost of living. So if we did bring down the cost of childcare, if we did make life easier for women who wants to return to work, maybe there wouldn't be a desperate need for all of this. It's all wrapped up into the same thing. But for me, it's about language, it's about culture, and it's about legislation.
Justin, given the current cost of living crisis and the impetus of many companies to save costs wherever they can, I suppose naturally a lot of people will think, well, look, we can't do this now because it's going to cost us money. Does it inevitably add to your costs?
Not inevitably, I would say. I think there may be a cost of transition, and no doubt Virgin Money will have found that out. But I think in the end, if you're open to a wider talent pool, then that's good for the bottom line. I mean, you know, we're seeing, just go back to something totally different, HGV drivers, you know, one of the reasons salaries are going up is they only fish in half the pool. It's literally a driver of inflation in this country now, the fact that the HGV industry isn't open to a wider talent pool, and that's very practical issues. So I think and as a result, pay costs go through the roof. So no, I've long believed there's a levelling up dividend to allowing more people to play fuller lives and to have more productive lives where they feel they can contribute on their terms. So I think in the end, you know, this is a win-win, and you know, it goes back to the happy people equals happy money point. So it's an investment, you know, and companies that make the investment get the returns.
Do you find that a lot of companies are still resistant to that, though? They just don't believe it. You can talk till you're blue in the face, and there are some people that you'll never convince of the benefits of flexible working.
I think there are some that think they're already doing it when they're not. So there'll be some that, you know, are probably part of that group that are rejecting 2 out of 3 every request, thinking, yeah, but we do 1 out of 3, so we do flexible working. So I think to some extent, it's probably employers who don't think they have a problem and almost need to see what a Virgin Money is doing, for example, to suddenly see this different world. So it's almost like when you show them the spectrum of colours out there, they'll suddenly realise that they were painting with just 3. I actually genuinely think a lot of employers do want to do the right thing, but actually you need to make it easy. And in some cases, as Tulip is saying, actually sometimes you do just need to say, this has to happen. You know, I passed gender pay gap regulations back in 2016, 2017, because actually we'd done quite a lot on gender and we tried to open up the workplace and open up progression, but fundamentally you had to measure. And so there are some areas where you just have to do legislation if you're really going to shift it into the mainstream. And I suspect this may be one of those areas based on, if you like, having it in place for 8 years. Now we can see how it's going. And I think there's a good evidence base to say that actually you're probably ready for flexible working 2.0. And also it's a good time to do it post-COVID, especially if we're saying that, you know, we need to make getting into opportunity more easier for more people. You know, we have people who are, you know, on working age benefits and roles that employers can't fill. So clearly there are barriers getting in the way of people going into those opportunities. And this is almost certainly a big one of those barriers to get removed.
Presumably, it is, as you said before, a bit of a buyer's market now. We have more or less full employment, particularly in some sectors. So the individual potential employee has a lot more bargaining chips than they might have had, I don't know, 10 years ago. But how do they deploy those bargaining chips? I mean, you're in the middle of a job interview and you then start making demands of your potential employer because you feel you're in a stronger position to do so. So is that happening in your experience already?
Absolutely. And I would say during the tail end of last year, I saw many examples, both ones I observed as well as with stories from other colleagues and HR professionals in other companies where candidates were coming with their requirements. Now, look, some of those requirements were a little bit, you know, entrepreneurial, but fair dues to them. People are being clear about what it is they want. And rather than see it as an issue, I think employers are wise to let it inform their strategies about how they want to now then devise their policies to attract that talent. And I think some of these demands were not, certainly the ones I've observed were realistic, but if you're not set up to meet that demand, then yes, it does look a bit extreme. Somebody saying, well, I would like to work a day in Manchester because my mother's not well and then come down to London. And if you haven't got equipment or technology or solutions for that to happen, then yes, it is going to look like an extreme request. But actually, if you have the foresight to think about, well, okay, how would I model for that type of workforce? How can I think about my operating model? Then that request then becomes a little bit more realistic. So candidates are doing this. And I have seen candidates turn down jobs because they do have a choice. And no longer are companies selecting, candidates are selecting companies. I always say to business leaders that I've advised over the last probably 5-6 years, you no longer are selecting, you are on you are being selected. And so you have to approach the market now in that type of way. What is your resume as a company and why would somebody come to you? So it's inverting the whole interaction model of how people now look for jobs.
It's a bit like when a bank rings you up and asks for your security, don't they? And they say, well, no, you tell me your security. You're phoning me. I mean, Justine, in a way, it's a complete change of mindset, isn't it, to what we've all been used to, where the seller of the labour is the one in control to an extent.
It is totally different, and it's one of the reasons why things will absolutely have to change. But I think the point that Sarita just made is a really important one. I think what we have to shift away from is this sense that it's a zero-sum game, that somehow if the employee wins some kind of concession from the employer, then somehow the employer's lost. Actually, what we're seeing increasingly is if you can bridge that gap between what that potential employee needs to be able to thrive in that role and what the employer needs as well to be able to run the business successfully, then that's an absolute win for both parties. And so it's just a different mindset. And I think quite rapidly we'll get to a point where we all think it was probably a bit weird that there were some employers that didn't see this almost as soon as the other. I mean, you know, let's be absolutely frank. You know, the reason why people were all working in offices originally was a physical issue, which was processing had to be done in the same place, because I was probably filling in some stuff on a bit of paper and then I had to pass it to the next person that had to deal with that paper. Now, the minute we went to IT-enabled processes, yeah, for quite a while, you needed the IT help desk to come and sort out your computer because it never really worked that well. And you needed a server that was in a very big room that was always locked in your place of work, which processed everything. Now it's all in the cloud. So, but we've sort of forgotten the fact that actually there was a very physical reason originally why people were all coming together, and there isn't now. So actually you do need to rethink. And I think that, as ever, when you have these big sea changes, it's going to be these older style companies that can't rethink their way through, that literally won't survive. And there's this brilliant book by Matthew Said on, it's called Rebel Ideas. And he talks about how actually when energy changed and we had electricity, it was companies that literally couldn't re-engineer their businesses around that and were still pretending it was all steam driven, that actually went out of business. You'd have thought the big existing companies would have done even better when this better energy source became available. And actually they just weren't nimble enough. And it was new companies that saw the opportunities for working differently and better that actually ended up thriving. And we're in another one of these changes. The reason this matters is because it is talent that's going to drive the 21st century. So it's not so much about whether you've got all your machines in the right way and connected up. It's people and creativity that will make or break economies in the 21st century, because that is the nature of our economies increasingly. So getting it right on something like hybrid working and flexible working is literally one of the most strategic questions you'll face, which is why, thankfully, HR, personnel, all of that people side of companies now, and the roles that, you know, people like Sarita has as leaders in their company have never been more strategic than they are, and they're only going to get more strategic than they are today in the future.
Tulip, MPs employ people. I mean, most MPs employ 5 or 6 people in their Westminster office, in their constituency office. As you've been working through this issue, has it made you challenge some of your own employment practices and made you change the way that you do things?
Sure. I'll answer that in 1 minute, Ian. I just want to say, when you asked Justine about the economy and she was mentioning it, and I think, Justine, you were economics secretary to the Treasury for a while as well. I'm doing that shadow role now. So I try and think of everything in a business way as much as I can. But I just wanted to say one thing, which is that businesses will lose out too if we don't start adapting to this new hybrid and flexible working conditions. Because I looked at some research that McKinsey had done, and they showed that 150 billion pounds would be added to our economy in the UK by 2030 if women were able to achieve their full potential at work. And the number one recommendation they put is to allow greater flexibility at work. So I just wanted to make a point, when people say, isn't this going to cost more? What's going to happen to the economy? That they're not looking at it in the right way. I've also found, if you ever want to get this government to do anything, you've got to talk about how the economy will improve. Any government, actually. So that's one of the things I always say when people challenge me. In terms of my working, when I started out as an intern in Parliament over 20 years ago now, there is no way you could have worked for an MP without being at the desk. And there's a couple of reasons. One is all the casework came through in letters. And so we filed it physically under each constituent's surname. Then we took up the case, we processed it. Sometimes we faxed them, which is unheard of now. My children don't know what a fax machine is. We faxed them, then we would physically write a letter to the housing association or wherever. We'd get a response, we'd photocopy it, we'd keep one on file and then send the other one. And we had advice surgery to the MP I worked for at the time every Friday, and it'd be like 2.5 hours, whatever it was in their constituency. Everyone wanted to come face to face. Weirdly now, after the pandemic, because during the pandemic, all my advice surgeries were on Zoom, my constituents don't want to go back to face-to-face surgeries. They actually said, well, if you're having the constituency surgery in West Hampstead and I live in Queen's Park, it actually takes me 25 minutes to get across the constituency. So can we just do it on Zoom? And I was really surprised by that, Ian, because I thought they'd want to come and see me because they were demanding to see their MP. But as long as they can see me on screen, they're happy. So my advice surgeries are now done on Zoom. That's completely changed. And my staff members really don't need to be there to open the mail bag anymore. They just have to be on the computer where they can access the emails, process the casework, store it on a kind of
You see,
system that we have. So
you,
it's completely changed.
you said that you were an intern 20 years ago. I was 35 years ago, and we had no computers. The MP that I worked for was quite forward thinking. I think we were one of the first parliamentary officers to get a computer. And I mean, thinking about it now, the highlight, I used to go to the post room 3 times a day because I loved undoing the letters and seeing what people were saying. But of course, you now do all that by email. But in terms of your own staff wanting more flexibility, have you found that they're more willing to actually say to you, well, look, could we do this? Could we do that?
Yeah, so my caseworker has a 1-year-old child, and she said to me, would it be possible to drop her at nursery, come to work, and then leave at 5 o'clock, pick her up, but then I'll do an hour at home afterwards, because normally you'd be there till 5:30 or 6, and she's coming in a bit later. And she's asked that in the interview, and it didn't stop her from getting the job. So that's what my caseworker does. Another one of my workers has wanted to work 1 day from home, just because, I don't know, she didn't actually give a reason, but she asked if she could. And to be honest, they do their work perfectly, and that's all I'm worried about. As long as I've got my results, I'm happy. I also find, it's Parliament and politics. I think you waste an enormous amount of time in the palace and in Westminster. When you're walking around, I think you probably get more work done at home, just because when you're walking around, you talk to 25 people on the way to your office.
You mean you gossip with them? Yeah, exactly.
It has made me, in all seriousness, it made me re-examine the way I employ people, because I do think their happiness is very important. But I also think if it doesn't detract from the work that they're doing, I have no problem if they're not physically sitting in the office.
In the end, it goes back to one word, doesn't it? Trust. And there'll be lots of employers to say, oh, well, I couldn't trust people to work from home. To which the response is, why are you employing them in the first place then if you don't trust them?
Ian, you could be sitting in the desk, you could sit sitting in the office on your desk on Facebook and Twitter all the time. I mean, I don't think it stops you from bunking from work if you're physically in the office. So
we've got to bring things to a conclusion in a moment. Sarita, any concluding thoughts from you?
That would have been it, actually. I was in a session with another company sharing the work we've done at Virgin Money, and they said, yeah, well, we do kind of the similar things, but we're requiring X, Y, and Z, and we need to know. And I said, okay, well, let's just look at that. If we're doing the same thing, what's the difference? The difference is we're leaving people to decide. We're trusting people. And what will happen is actually you'll get more engagement and more productivity in that model than in a model where when you tell people. Our world is changing now. People don't want to be told. They want to be trusted. They want to be empowered. And I always say to some business leaders that I've talked to about this that have different views, which is, let's be clear, for those people that the reasons you resist this agenda is for the percentage of people that probably would just be poor performers anyway, even if they were in the office. Let's be really honest about that. And then you see the light bulbs come on and they're like, well, that's probably true. So I think it's very important. Trust is key and empowerment's key. And when we've been asked at Virgin Money by our colleagues, will this be here forever? Are there any plans to change it? Our CEO's been asked, I've been asked, and I go back with the same line, which is, it won't change as long as we make it work. And if we make it work, there'll be no need for it to change. It will only get better. So I think when you bring people in, you give a collective ownership, I believe you can't go wrong.
So Justin, let's have some concluding remarks from you. I think one of the things that has become clear over the last hour is that if any employer is watching this webinar, I think they will go away from this maybe with a much more, should we say, enlightened view than maybe they had before, because I think each of you have put the case for flexible working brilliantly. What would you like to, over the next 5 to 10 years, Justine, how would you like to see things change?
I think, first of all, the law does need to catch up with today's world. And so I hope that Tulip can make some progress with the bill. I hope it comes back. I think, secondly, employers just need to realize this is not only the right thing to do because it opens up more opportunities to more people, it's also the smart thing to do, because actually you're shifting to a business model that is way better for your employees, and as a result, way better for you as a company. And there are lots of other businesses and employers out there that are already doing this. So you're not having to even start it from scratch. You can hook up with a Virgin Money, find out what they did, what their experiences were. So there's no need to shy away from this agenda. I think it's just about deciding that you want to take that step. And that's what I'd really encourage. But I think it's just been fantastic listening to both Sarita and also Tulip on, how enthused they are around driving flexible working. And if we can do this, it's just such a fundamental part of how we'll drive the leveled up Britain. So it matters from every single perspective. And I think it's been a fantastic discussion. Thanks for chairing it, Ian. Not
at all. And sorry if people want to read this Levelling Up Impact Report that you've done, is it online anywhere?
It is the Purpose Coalition. I think, Justine, it's on the Purpose Coalition site. So there's an electronic link to that.
Right. And there's all the other webinars that we've been done on that website as well. Justine, Tulip, Sarita, thank you very much for joining us. I'm Ian Dale. Goodbye.